We're here at the Web 2.0 Summit in San Francisco, California, and with me I have Thomas Drake, a former NSA employee who's going to speak about the importance of big data and then some later. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well.
So for people who don't have context on what brings you here in the past 5 years of your life, what did you do and how has the government reacted?
Well, in simple terms, I spoke truth to power.
Truth to power
truth
about?
to power is speaking about government illegalities, management, malfeasance, wrongdoing, fraud, waste, and abuse.
From what I can understand, the specific concern regarded choosing to spend vast amounts of money on a program that would not be effective in terms of the intelligence gathering operations part of our government.
That's partly true. NSA faced a huge challenge going into the 21st century. How to handle the vast streams of data that were pouring in every day, and certainly just amazing amounts of data, far more than they ever dealt with during the Cold War. And they just were not being able to handle it. In fact, some were saying the NSA was going deaf or drowning in all the data. Mm-hmm. And so they decided to spend many, many billions on a flagship program called Trailblazer that ostensibly was going to solve that problem. But after several billions of dollars were blown, it delivered nothing except a few PowerPoint slides. However, deep within NSA, a very small team, about a dozen government and contractors, had taken on the challenge during the 90s to solve the data problem.
Okay.
And that was a project called ThinThread. It's about $3 million. It was essentially an internal, government internet garage operation.
And a skunkworks, if you will.
A skunkworks, as you will. That's right, precisely.
And does ThinThread persist in any meaningful way now?
Not at all. It became viewed as a corporate threat. It was not defined as a corporate solution. It was a direct threat to the large defense contractors that, were wanting to feed, as I call the Trailblazer trough, belly up to the Trailblazer bar, because the money was just, phenomenal. And so the very best of America in terms of, necessity being the mother of invention, unfortunately and tragically was never allowed to persist.
Now, when you saw this issue, you tried to raise concerns about it within government.
Within government, for several years, actually.
Okay, and
both at NSA, and then I was called as a material witness on several very large investigations. Two of them were 9/11 congressional investigations, looking into what had happened, where did we fail, where did it all break down, how did 9/11 even occur, and then later on a Department of Defense Inspector General audit investigation of both Trailblazer and ThinThread.
A recent Washington Post investigation, which was made into a Frontline special that aired earlier this year, looked into what they called Top Secret America, this large secret expansion of electronic surveillance and many other areas that many Americans may not be aware of. How accurate was that investigation? What should people know about what exists and persists?
Well, it's a sobering book, and some would say perhaps even frightening. There's a rise of the national security state within our own country, a secret government, as it will. And it's fundamentally anathema to our form of government, which is a constitutional republic and a democracy. And it has grown by leaps and bounds since 9/11. So there's this vast side of, as it is articulated in quite some detail in the book, this vast apparatus, essentially the 21st century version of what Eisenhower warned us about during his farewell address back in 1961, the rise of the military-industrial complex. I would add it's now the congressional intelligence surveillance, now cybersecurity complex.
What systems of accountability exist for these components of our government, particularly with respect to Congress, particularly with respect to the Inspector Generals who you brought the issue to?
Well, I went to the very committees that are responsible for oversight, both the Senate and House Intelligence Select Committees. They're permanent select committees that were formed during the 1970s, late 1970s, to address the abuses of the American citizens during the 60s and 70s. It all came out during the Nixon administration. Church Pike committee hearings. So these two committees were formed to provide that type of oversight, particularly oversight with respect to the secret parts of government. In this case, the intelligence side of government.
One of the parts of government that's been discussed in the national sphere more in the past 3 years has been this idea of open government. And part of that is protection for whistleblowers. It's been important in the private sector. It should be important in the public sector. What protections should exist, and what protections were actually afforded to you under the statutes that exist?
Well, my contact with both Congress as well as the Department of Defense Inspector General, when those auditors, investigators actually called me as a material witness, was my protection was supposed to be provided by what was referred to as the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act. This is actually a congressional law that was passed in 1998. Unfortunately, as I found out, that protected communications wasn't protected, and there was no enforcement mechanism. Now, my cooperation with the Department of Defense, I was very concerned about being compromised, and it turns out that I was. And although I was told that because of concerns about retaliation, I could then file a reprisal complaint with the Department of Defense.
We're living, as I think we discussed earlier, in an exabyte age, right? There are unbelievable amounts of data that are being generated. Government is certainly responsible for generating a fair bit of themselves, and also has a great interest in collecting them. What dangers persist and exist in that world, and what tools or practices do both government agencies need to adopt and citizens need to consider as they move through this world?
Well, given the zeroing ordeal I went through, and given that my life has turned literally inside out, I would just ask the audience to imagine for the moment if the government were to take a microscope and put on the highest resolution possible in terms of your life and reveal every contact you've ever had, every email you ever sent, every tweet you've ever made, and all your friends and all your social links, turn that inside out, whether or not they would really want to accept that. The sheer amount of data now that the government and corporate entities have on individuals is staggering. Essentially, privacy is being severely eroded and very quickly, and it's something we really need to address. I personally fear for the Republic. The amount of information the government has its hands on, and putting it into the wrong hands in secret in terms of what they can do with that. One of the things about my concern is the rise of a national, not just a national security state, but a police state. And I think it's something that needs to be increasingly addressed in public. We need to have the discussions about it. Can a secret government truly coexist going forward with what is supposed to be our constitutional republic? I would say not. And increasing the line is still being drawn far more to the security side of the equation than is on the liberty. The thing is, our fundamental security is based on our liberties and our freedoms. You start eroding that, and given the technology of today, the ability of the government to monitor and surveil its own citizenry, it's a frightening prospect. And it's certainly a country that it's increasingly difficult for me to accept.
Well, there you have it. Thomas Drake. You can certainly see more from him shortly at the Web 2.0 Summit. We'll have video of that online as well.